Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. On this episode, I got a story for you. I recently had a conversation with two of the homies, fellow podcasters, good friends of mine, Uncle Dolomite and King Germ. You all know those two guys. They've been on this podcast before. Uncle Dolomite, the Too Much Game podcast is his podcast. And King Germ, Podden Saved Our Marriage is his podcast. Recently, we were on a call, the three of us. And fortunately for me, I completed my work by the time I took the call because we proceeded to stay on the call for about an hour and a half. And they called me. I don't even remember what they called me for, but we ended up talking about a myriad of things. And the story that I'm about to tell you is a story that I shared with them, but it's worth repeating because I think I really need to bring it to the podcast. At the time of this recording, by the time that most of you are hearing this, is Sunday. Sunday's a good day. It's the day of the Lord. And it's also football. You know, those things are associated with Sundays, church and football. We're not going to talk football, and we're going to talk around church. I don't really believe in speaking on religion on the podcast. In fact, as long as I've had this podcast, which is almost 10 years now, I don't know that I've ever talked about religion, so I'm not going to start today. However, what I will talk about is a situation that happened to me, and it dealt with someone in the church, indirectly. So just to kind of piggyback off of the idea of what we're going to talk about. Again, let me just start by saying that you believe what you want to believe. Some people go to church faithfully and some people don't. Personally, I grew up in the church, grew up in a AME church, that stands for African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I enjoyed church as a child, but, you know, like anybody else, I had my questions about some of the things that we saw and we did. But nonetheless, you know, church was cool. I met some really interesting people at church, obviously, and probably one of my best friends in the world, my man Jay Fresh, whose father was a pastor as well. And I've known Jay Fresh since we were 6 years old. We're still tight to this day. But the thing that always intrigued me was not so much as the word, but sometimes the man or woman delivering the word. The thing that we were taught as kids was, you know, you follow the word. But let's be honest. A lot of people are attracted to church based on the person delivering the sermons every Sunday. And that goes without saying that happens a lot. And it's understood that it does happen. But as I got older, we were taught to follow the word and not the man delivering the word or the woman delivering the word. Because when I was younger, I don't really remember a lot of women preachers, but today that's not the case. Nonetheless, that's what we were taught. And so, you know, you kind of, in my opinion, you hold pastors at a high standard. They're deliverers of the word. They're the proverbial shepherds of the flock, if you will. And I think it would be crazy if we did not recognize the elephant in the room, which is when you talk about church, particularly the black church. I can't speak to other churches because I've only gone to a white church one time. And it was dope. I mean, like that particular service, man, we got church started at like 10 o'clock. We were out of there at 11 o'clock. I've never been to a service that fast in my life. Literally, church started at 10:01, and by 11:01 we were in the parking lot. Amazing. But that being said, particularly in the black church, and it's not good. Just understand, folks, I'm not talking about every black church, just some of the ones that I've been to and some of the ones that I've seen. There's always been an interesting dynamic between the pastor and the congregation. And then also there's also always been an interesting dynamic between the pastor and the funds that he has received from the church, or she has received from the church, as far as compensation is concerned. That's always an interesting dynamic, because if you believe in the Bible, it teaches you to tithe, or it speaks on tithing. I'm not going to get into scriptures because I'll be honest, I don't know a lot of scriptures. For somebody who goes to church as much as I do, I can't name you 5 scriptures. But I will say this much, especially as I've gotten older, I'm more focused on the actual word as opposed to the person delivering the word. And I say this as someone who goes to church pretty frequently. Now, I hadn't been in a couple of Sundays, but but I do belong to a church, and I do enjoy going to church. But I will say I don't go like every Sunday. I'm not even gonna sit here and tell y'all that. But that being said, there's always an interesting dichotomy between the people in the church and the person that's leading the church, as far as the pastor is concerned. We've seen over the years, it's been well documented, and we see it visually if you go to church. There's quite a few pastors who have made quite a bit of money from the church. I think that I don't think we're breaking news here, right? But the flip side of that is that, some have raised a few eyebrows, if you will, with their behavior and their finances, both in and out of the pulpit. And again, I'm not telling you that you should believe a particular religion. Personally, I believe in God, and that's all that matters to me. Which you could believe in a rock. I'm cool with that. And what I'm about to tell you, I don't think should sway anybody one way or the other as to what they should believe in, because you believe in what you believe in. But that being said, I had a situation that happened to me that involved what we call a dirty pastor. Now, here's the thing. When we speak of dirty pastors, let's be honest. There are some pastors out there who have made money, and the money that they've made has been way above what they probably should be getting from the church. It's an interesting dynamic between what a pastor makes sometimes and what's actually reported as far as income. And I say that based on experience, and I'll share with you my experience. As many of you know, maybe you don't know, at one point in time in my life, I was a mortgage loan officer. And when you're a loan officer, when you take an application for someone applying for a mortgage, looking to purchase a house or refinance a mortgage, you have to be able to verify their income. I will tell you, in my experience as a loan officer, without a shadow of a doubt, the hardest people to prove income for were for pastors. Not even someone that's self-employed, because self-employed, you got tax returns, right? You can read the tax returns, and maybe there's a little bit of money hidden over here or not reported over there. That happens. Pastors, almost always, as a loan officer, I hated taking applications on pastors because you could almost never really lock down and verify all of their income. And I remember one time I took an application for a pastor. He had this small, and this actually wasn't even a black pastor, it was a white pastor. He had a small church right outside of Atlanta. And nice guy, but how can I say this? His debts said that he earned well into six figures, but his income only said that he earned $50,000. So he had debts of someone that probably made about $300,000. But his income that was reported was only like $50,000. And so as I'm asking questions like, hey, I need this, I need pay stubs, I need a W-2. And he's like, well, we'll get it to you, but what do you need that for? I'm like, hey, brother, we got to verify this income. If you say you make $50,000, I need to show that you make $50,000. But if you make $300,000, then you need to provide you need to provide all the stuff that shows that you make $300,000. He's like, well, I get a little stipend here and I get some money from over here. And what he was basically telling me was like, he couldn't verify all of his income. Okay, cool. Well, what can you verify? You know what I can verify, 12 Kyle? 50 grand. And that was it. And so I looked at him kind of skeptically, but suffice to say, we couldn't do the loan because we can only use the income that you can verify. But like I said, as a loan officer, and that's not to say that every pastor is crooked, because they're not. But the problem was you have to be able to verify your income. In this case, we weren't, so we weren't able to do it. And it's just been my experience as a loan officer. And I was a loan officer, 4 years, I think, as a loan officer. Those were the hardest loans to do because you could never verify their income. Never. So I said all that to get into this story. I had a situation that happened with me, with a pastor, kind of indirectly, but directly as well. And it was a very interesting thing to happen. And it's probably more common than we actually think. But before I get into it, let's take a quick commercial break. On the other side of the break, we'll talk about this dirty pastor. Sit tight. We'll be back in just a second. Are you feeling nostalgic for the golden eras of rap and soul music? If so, tune in to the Rap Soul Podcast. We are your weekly journey through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, spotlighting the music and the hidden gems that shaped the soundtrack of our lives. From the powerful beats to the soulful melodies, we bring you the best of the past with fresh insights and stories. Rediscover the music that defined a generation. Subscribe to the Rap Soul Podcast and enjoy the vibes. And just like that, we are back. Once again, it's your boy 12 Kyle. This is the 12 Kyle Podcast, and we are talking about the dirty pastor. So I told you before the break I was going to give you a story, so here we go. I'll never forget. This had to be about, I don't know, maybe 17, 18 years ago. And to protect the guilty, let's just call this pastor Reverend Wrong. So Reverend Wrong is the subject that we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to use his real name. So one day, a young 12 Kyle was, living here in Metro Atlanta, and I had to get some work done on my little car. And so I didn't take it, couldn't afford to take it to the dealership. So I'm at the little mom and pop spot, getting my oil changed and tires rotated and all of that good stuff. So I'm sitting in this room, and I'm in this room, basically the waiting room. And I come in and I tell them what I want, pay for it or whatever, sit down. Now, as I'm sitting down, before I sit down, actually, I kind of scan the room. There's nobody else in the room, but there was one person in the room. There was a young lady. She had to be probably about 25, 26 years old. And, we made eye contact. I kind of nodded, and that was it. And so after I paid for my transaction for them to perform the service, I sit down. I don't think I had my cell phone with me. So I grabbed a local paper, and this was one of those local papers where they kind of talk about the business stuff or, the stuff that's just happening, just not a newspaper, but just a local newsletter, if you will. And it talks about the businesses and everything around in the county and the county in which I live. And so I sit down And again, I make eye contact with the young lady, and she's looking at me, and she's not doing anything. She's just kind of looking around. And I sit down, and the person who got my information and everything and rung me up, they left. So it's just me and this young lady in the room. So we're in the room, and I grab the paper, and I pull the paper up, and I'm literally holding the paper in front of my face. So I can't no longer see the young lady across, and she's sitting directly across from me in the room. And as I'm holding the paper up, I'm reading. And she just all of a sudden blurts out, "Oh man, he ain't shit. He is a terrible person." Huh? And I don't know what she's talking about because there's nobody else in the room. It's just me and her. And I don't pull the paper down. I'm still holding the paper up. And she says it again. "He is just a terrible person. I can't stand him. I hate him." And so I'm puzzled because now I realize that she didn't have a cell phone in her hand and she's just speaking out loud, but I don't know who she's talking to. So let me run that back for you. It's just me and her in the room. And she blurts out that she hates this guy. And it's just me and her in the room. And so I'm like, "Lady, what are you talking about? Who are you talking to?" And I didn't realize that there was a picture of a pastor on the backside of the paper. And that's what she was looking at. She saw his picture and she expressed how much she hated this guy. Now that's news to me because it takes me a second to realize what she's because I don't know what's on the back of the paper. She can see the paper. I can't see the back of the paper. I'm reading, the business section or whatever. And then so I put the paper down and I say, "Excuse me?" Because at this point I'm befuddled, right? And she said, him, that guy right there on the paper. And I was like, I looked around. She was like, "The paper in your hand." Because at this point, again, I'm confused. She said, "The paper in your hand." And so I flipped the paper over and it's a picture of Pastor Reverend Wrong. And I'm like, "Oh, I know him. I've been to his church." And the reason why I said it like that was because I did. At the time, I was going to his church. But because she had made such a broad statement, I wasn't going to tell her that I was we never joined the church, but it was a church that we were going to because the church seemed to be a cool church. It wasn't that far from our house. Our oldest son, I think he was in pre-K there, at the time, or at one point in time. I don't know. He wasn't in pre-K at the time. He was our oldest son, Dion, was in pre-K at that particular church at some point. And so we were familiar with, the people there, as far as the pre-K program or whatever. And then we just started going to the church because we were looking for a church to go to, right? And so I give her the general, I've been to that church. Because at this point, I don't know where this is going. And so at this point, y'all know me, I got to play dumb because I want to know what the problem is, because now we have a conversation. And so I said, "Oh, yeah, I know this guy. I've been to this church before." And she was like, "Oh, he ain't shit. I'm telling you, that nigga ain't shit." Wait a minute. It went from "I hate you" to "he ain't shit." And so I said, "Well, what happened? Why do you say that?" I was like, I said, "I've been to the church. It seemed like a nice guy, I guess," which is kind of far from the truth because even though we had gone to the church before or had been going to the church, I'll be honest, even before she tells me all of what she's about to tell me, I had my questions. I had my questions about how the guy was kind of moved. Because here's the thing. I'm a person who watches people. I watch your actions more so than your words. And while I thought dude was, a pretty good deliverer of his sermons, when you see him, moving around with people in the church or talking to people after church, some of his moves just looked a little funny to me, always. And I told my wife that before, when we started going to the church. I was like, something ain't right. I was like, he seemed kind of off. And she was like, what do you mean by that? I was like, when you see a pastor interact with the congregation, it should be warmth. It should be, good feelings, good vibes. I didn't get that. And full disclosure, I never had a conversation with the man. Didn't really want to, because I just I didn't get good vibes from him. In spite of what he preached on Sundays, I just didn't see that being correlated in the times that I would see him in the congregation, or I think I saw him one time at Publix, where shopping is a pleasure. I didn't speak, but I just kind of watched. Again, I'm somebody I'm very observant. So at this point, I'm really intrigued because of what she says at this point. And I'm like, so what do you mean? And so she was like, he ain't shit. He's a liar, and he's not who he says he is. And so my next question is, well, how do you know? Because at this point, I'm being nosy. And she proceeds to tell me that this pastor who's married with children, is not the man of God that he claims to be. She then tells me that this pastor is having a full-blown out affair. And so my next question is, well, how do you know? Because again, I'm being nosy, but the thing is, I played it real cool. I'm asking just general questions because I generally want to know, but I'm also posing it in a sense of hey, yeah, tell me more. I'm really interested, which I was interested, but I didn't know how far she was going to go. And I've mentioned on this podcast before, and it's worth repeating, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but people tend to talk to me. And I guess I have this look on my face hey, let me talk to that guy. And people will tell me they'll tell me some of their most innermost thoughts and secrets and stuff at our first meeting. Again, I don't know this lady from Jack. And so she proceeds to tell me that not only is this pastor having an affair, but he is keeping her, because he is having an affair with her best friend. Because I said, well, how do you know? She was like, well, he's sleeping with my best friend. And I was like, are you sure that's him? She was like, yeah, I know. She was like, I know, that's Reverend Wrong, pastor of the Wrong church. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just kind of stopped at that point, because when I said okay, I did what a lot of people don't do. You stop talking and then you let them talk, because at this point she has something to say. There's no need for me to get in and defend him. There's no need for me to get in and question anything. You be quiet, and the person who's talking, let them talk and let them take the conversation whichever way they want to go. It's an old trick. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then so she proceeds to tell me about how not only is he having an affair with this young lady, but he's spending, lavish. He's paying for her downtown condo in Atlanta, which, condo in the city at that particular time could have run you a couple of G's a month. He's taking her on lavish trips out of the country and to Jamaica and, places and everything, spent lavish gifts. And she also said that, quote, he was going to marry her, or at least that's what he told her, close quote. And so I'm taking all of this stuff in, and as she's talking, my head is kind of turning. And then I thought about it. I said, okay, now it kind of adds up. But now some of the behaviors that I saw, the standoffishness, the kind of cool vibes, I don't want to say cool, let's say cold vibes that I got from him. Now it makes sense. This man got one foot in the pulpit and one foot in the street. And while there's some that live like that, you can't live like that. outside of it being whatever you think about it morally, eventually that type of stuff catches up with you. And so I'm listening and I'm just like, oh, really? And so she's telling me about how, he pays for her stuff every month. She has an allowance. And she was like, and all of this money's coming from the church. And that's when I really lean in like, word? Are you kidding? And she's telling me all of these stories about how, he's taking money from the church and he gets so much money from the church each week. And so much of that is used to spend and fund this young lady's life. And he told her, Reverend Wrong told her that he is going to leave his wife of, 10, 15 years, and he's going to marry her. That's probably not the thing that you want to tell anybody unless you're actually serious and straight up about something you're going to do. In this case, I think Reverend Wrong probably was leading this young lady astray because he just wanted to keep the heat off his back. And she said, she gave an example of like one time she was at her friend's house and Reverend Wrong calls and said, hey, I want to see you tonight. Now, Reverend Wrong told the first lady of the church, his wife, that he was going to a board meeting. And so he basically was like, hey, I'm on the way. I only got 30 minutes, but, I need to see you. And so this young lady who I'm talking to, had to actually leave the spot because, in essence, her friend was a kept woman. And so she had to get ready for the dirty pastor to come through. And he had to come through and do what he do. She had to do what she had to do. And, they pleased each other and he had to go back on his merry way to get back to the crib. So much for the board meeting. And so this had gone on, according to this young lady, for a couple of years. And she was tired of it because she was tired of seeing her friend get hurt because she felt like every time her friend brought up, well, hey, when is it going to be me and you? When is it going to be me and you? He would just buy her a bracelet or he would take her on a trip. It would always be something. And it was never any type of concrete stuff as far as to whether or not they were going to seriously be a couple. Well, if you know the game, they were never going to be a couple. But he was just kind of shooting her that dream. And, an old player is going to shoot a woman a dream every now and then, but not like this. This dude is on a whole nother level. And she's telling me this, and keep in mind, this lady is a total stranger. She don't know 12 God. She don't know me at all. And I don't know her. She just started spilling the beans because she saw a picture. And I listened to it all. And this lady, for probably about 25 minutes, just gave me everything that I needed to hear. Now, I had one or two things that I could do with this information. I could either, jump on Twitter and out Reverend Wrong. But y'all know that's not my steez. That's not how I kick it. That's not how I get down. But what I will say is we stopped going to that church. And I remember this distinctly. There was a Sunday where, they come for the tithes and offer. And here, full disclosure, I never tithed at the church. There was a Sunday where, they had taken the tithes and offerings, right? So they get the tithes. So they take the tithes and offering in the back of the church or whatever. So back there, ushers counting up the money. And I guess, this is just my guess, but I guess that it wasn't enough money for Reverend Wrong that particular week. I don't know if he had a trip coming up. I don't know if he had to pay old girl student loans. I don't know what it was. So after that part of the service, he comes back to the congregation and says, and I'm paraphrasing here, what we got wasn't enough. I know you have more. Please find it in your heart and in your pockets and in your wallets to pay a little bit more for your tithes and offering, because we've got these bills coming. We've got this building fund, which, listen, every church got a building fund. That church never, I don't think they ever laid a new brick anywhere. But at least not the time that I was going there. And even the time after I left, because the church isn't that far from where I live. So I still drive by there from time to time just because it's on the way to wherever I'm going. And I don't see any type of extension, any type of building that's ever happened. So that was that. So he basically said, hey, y'all brokies, y'all got to get in your pockets and give me more money. And honestly, and I mean, like, the way that it was proposed to the church, like, he almost made you feel bad. But think about it like this. If you're in that congregation that particular day and the pastor says, okay, it's time for you to give, and let's say you give $100 and that's your last $100. You don't get paid again until Friday, and you literally got $20 left. He comes back and says, well, hey, that ain't enough. Give us some more. And you give that last $20, and you're leaving out of the church, literally and figuratively, with no money until Friday. Now, a lot of people have thoughts on how God will provide for you for that particular time, because again, you're giving to the house, not necessarily to the man, but in this case, they were giving to the house and the man. And so, but what do you do if you're that person? You know what I mean? And so I guess you have faith that, you'll make it financially till Friday until you get paid. And then there are others who will go without, they'll borrow money or not drive to work or eat, PB&Js all week and not do lunch just to make it, because that's their sacrifice. But you have to ask yourself, what kind of sacrifice was the dirty pastor doing? Because he literally and figuratively could have collected this money to fund his affair. And so I remember that. And so that particular moment stood out to me. Now, full disclosure, I gave $20 when they asked. When he came back around, I ain't give nothing, because, bro, 20 was what you was going to get. And, could I have given more than 20? Sure. But I never felt any more comfortable. I think the most I ever gave in church, in that particular church, was $25. And, $25 is not tithing for me financially, because I make a little bit more than $25. But I ain't get the vibe. I never got a good vibe from that guy. So in conclusion, long story short, maybe about 2 years later, I just happened to be scrolling a local newspaper, and it says in big headlines, Reverend Wrong and First Lady file for divorce. Apparently, the young lady who was being kept, the word, the paper didn't go into it, but the word that I got was that this young lady came forth and she spilled the whole beans to the First Lady. And not only that, it was later found out that not only was this affair going on, but he had 2 more other affairs. So Reverend Wrong was pretty busy. And what was interesting was, they filed for divorce. She got whatever she was going to get. And when I say she, I mean the First Lady. She got whatever she was going to get from Reverend Wrong. And, she moved on. And the word got out. And there were people, there were people who were divided, if you will. And some, once they found out, left the church. And then there were others who stuck around and stayed in the church. And this may or may not surprise you, but Reverend Wrong still has that church. And he still has people that come to church every Sunday and they give money, knowing what all was alleged in the divorce proceedings and everything else. And what's interesting is that the story that I just told you, I mean, that pretty much came out. Again, it's not from my place for me to tell you who he was and who she was, because I don't know these people. But the flip side of it is it did come out, and there's still people going to the church. So I guess the bigger question is, who do you follow? Do you follow the word, or do you follow the man giving the word? The thing I would tell you, just my personal opinion, follow the word. Be trusting, if you will, of the person delivering the word, but understand that if you follow the Bible, it'll tell you that we're all sinners. How do we all sin? 3 ways: in thoughts, words, and deeds. So it says that no sin is bigger than the other. So understand this: if you're in church and there's a woman in a tight-fitting dress, there's probably going to be a man or two that's going to look at her butt. The man that may look at her butt might be in the pulpit. And just understand that at the end of the day, he's a man. And that ain't going to ever change. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. The podcast drops every Sunday and every Thursday at midnight. If you're on social media, follow us on social media at 12 Kyle, at 12 Kyle podcast. If you're on YouTube, definitely follow us on YouTube. Hit the like, hit the subscribe button, and share it with a friend. Share it with a friend. Share it with a friend. The great thing about our YouTube channel is that we have both audio and video as well. We also have a Reddit page. If you'd like to continue this, tongue-tied, sorry. If you'd like to continue this discussion, hit us up on Reddit // 12 Kyle podcast. Let me slow down. I'm talking too fast. If you want to contribute to the podcast financially, hit us up $TWELVEKYLE. Also, you can hit the description box. Look in there. There's a link that says merch. Click that link and you can buy 12 Kyle podcast merch. That's t-shirts, hoodies, as well as coffee mugs like the one I'm holding right here. It is so dope, and it's relatively cheap. Also, before I forget, we have a new baby. It is called the Rap Soul Podcast. It's a new podcast, and it's the intersection of hip hop, R&B, rap, soul music from the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. Music, artists, everything. So tap into that. You can find the Rap Soul Podcast where you found this podcast. We got YouTube as well, so you can check that out. Those episodes drop every Monday at midnight. So you're getting 3 episodes from your boy every week. Again, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy 12 Kyle. We'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's. Yeah.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.